February 18th, 2026, 03:11 a.m. A tree line south of Tokmak, Zaporizhzhia Oblast. On a thermal screen 200 kilometers away, a shape resolves out of the green and black noise. Camouflage netting, sagging under a week of frost. Underneath it, a dish, folded, angled, waiting. The operator's thumb hovers over the release toggle. He has been staring at this exact patch of ground for 11 minutes, and for 3 weeks before that, he wasn't sure it existed at all. He presses it. A shape drops away from the drone's belly, and 8 seconds later, the tree line lights up from the inside. That single drop was the first of 4. What it hit was not a truck, not a foxhole, not a column of infantry. It was a $100 million Russian radar complex that had been quietly deciding which Ukrainian aircraft lived and which ones didn't. This is the story of how one slow, unglamorous octocopter found it, and why the radar's own crew never saw the bomb coming until the tree line was already burning. Its name is the 55ZH-6M Nebo-M. NATO analysts call it a threat to stealth aircraft. Russian air defense doctrine calls it the eyes of the S-400. For 19 days it sat in that tree line believing it was invisible. It was wrong, and the reason it was wrong is the whole point of this video. The drone that found it cost roughly $12,000. The radar it destroyed cost roughly $100 million. Somewhere in that gap is the entire story of how this war is actually being fought in 2026. And it isn't with the weapons either side spent the last 30 years building. Rewind 3 weeks. Zaporizhzhia Oblast, southern Ukraine, late January 2026. The front line here runs roughly along the Tokmak axis, a flat, treeless stretch of farmland that has barely moved in 2 years. 23 kilometers behind the Russian side of that line sits the town of Tokmak, a rail junction the Russians turned into a logistics hub back in 2022. Ukrainian intelligence had suspected for months that Russia was running a Nebo-M complex somewhere in this sector. The system feeds 3-dimensional tracking data to the S-400 batteries protecting the Melitopol-Tokmak corridor, and to the MiG-31 and Su-35 patrols flying cover further south. Without it, Russian air defense in this stretch of the front goes half blind. Nobody had a location. That's the part people miss about modern radar hunting. You don't see the box, you see the noise it makes. A Ukrainian UAV strike company, operating under the callsign Night Watch, attached to a mechanized brigade defending the Orikhiv sector, had one operator whose entire job for 6 months had been exactly this. His call sign is Sych, Ukrainian for owl. He is 26 years old. Before the invasion, he repaired industrial refrigeration units in Zaporizhzhia city. Now he flies at night, because that's when the R18 he pilots does its best work. 3 months earlier, a Ukrainian MiG-29 pilot flying cover over this same sector had been forced into a hard evasive dive when his radar warning receiver screamed a lock tone that traced back to this exact stretch of tree line. He broke off, dumped chaff, and made it home. But the near-miss report he filed afterward became one more thread quietly pulling Nightwatch's attention toward Tokmak. The R18, nicknamed the Vampire, is built by the Ukrainian volunteer collective Wild Hornets. It's an octocopter, 8 rotors instead of 4, which means it can keep flying even if it loses 2 of them to ground fire. It carries up to 11 kilograms of ordnance, cruises low and slow, and runs almost silent above 150 meters. It was never designed to dogfight anything. It was designed to survive a 2-hour loiter over hostile ground and come home. 3 weeks earlier, Ukrainian signals units had picked up something odd. A burst of electromagnetic emissions near Tokmak, active for roughly 90 seconds, then gone. It happened again 4 nights later, then again. Each time, the signal profile matched the L-band search radar that's part of a Nebo-M complex. Radars have a problem they can't design their way out of. To find aircraft, they have to broadcast. And every time they broadcast, they tell anyone listening roughly where they are. Roughly, not exactly. That gap between roughly and exactly is where Sych spent the next 3 weeks of his life. Here's what nobody expected going into this hunt. The emissions weren't consistent enough to triangulate cleanly. The Nebo-M crew was disciplined. They lit up the radar for short windows, rotated between 2 or 3 suspected firing positions, and killed the signal before any fix could lock. 3 separate attempts at triangulation in the first 10 days produced 3 different possible grid squares, none of them confirmed. Ukrainian signals intercept alone couldn't close the gap. The crew's operational discipline was better than expected, and after 10 days, the team had 3 candidate positions and 0 confirmations. So they stopped trying to fix the radar from its own signal and started flying instead, sending short, cautious R18 sorties into each candidate zone, hoping to catch it lit up on thermal before it went dark again. I spent time going through the mission logs from this period, and one detail kept nagging at me. Sych's flights weren't dramatic. No fireworks, no near misses. Just quiet 10-minute passes over empty tree lines, night after night, coming back with nothing. 6 sorties, 6 blanks. On the 7th, on February 9th, his thermal camera caught a flicker of heat, bloom half a kilometer off the main road south of Tokmak. Too brief to identify, too specific to ignore. A diesel generator, running for 11 minutes then shutting down. Radars need generators. Generators need fuel deliveries. Fuel deliveries leave tire tracks. He marked the coordinates and came home. Over the next 5 nights, the picture sharpened. A generator trailer, a run of camouflage netting draped over something rectangular and low, and, on February 13th, for the first time, a partial silhouette under the netting that matched the folded antenna array of a Nebo-M L-band module almost exactly. Almost. Not quite enough to commit 4 bombs and a $12,000 airframe to a single guess. What strikes me about this stretch of the operation is how little of it looks like the war people imagine. No missile launch, no fighter jet, no dramatic radar lock alarm blaring in a cockpit. Just a guy in a basement, night after night, waiting for a truck to leave a tire track in the wrong place. Here's the part that doesn't make sense on the surface. If this radar was worth $100 million and was protecting one of the most contested stretches of the southern front, why was it parked in a tree line with a diesel generator running on a predictable schedule? The answer, as far as Ukrainian analysts can reconstruct it, is confidence. Nebo-M units are typically kept 20 to 30 kilometers behind the line, specifically because that distance is supposed to put them outside the range of anything but long-range missiles. Weapons Russian air defense is built to intercept. Nobody accounted for a $12,000 drone with a 2-hour loiter time and no radar signature worth mentioning. What this tells us about the war in 2026 is blunter than most people want to admit. Air defense doctrine built for the missile age assumes the threat comes fast, from altitude, on a predictable radar-visible trajectory. A slow octocopter drifting in under 100 meters at 40 kilometers an hour doesn't fit that model. It isn't that Russian crews are careless. It's that an entire generation of defensive planning has a blind spot exactly the size of this drone. The gap between suspicion and confirmation closed on February 17th. A second R18, flown by a different pilot on a parallel sortie, caught something the first drone had missed. A man walking from the generator trailer to the netted structure, checking a cable run, then disappearing back under the camouflage. Crew presence. Active equipment. This wasn't a decoy. Sych had his target. What he didn't have yet was a green light, because striking a live Nebo-M complex meant crossing deep enough into contested airspace that if the drone was spotted on the way in, there would be no second attempt. The mission was approved for the following night. Nobody on that approval call knew Russia had already scheduled a rotation that would move the entire complex 40 kilometers east within the week. February 18th. 01:52 a.m. Launch. Sych's R18 lifts off from a position roughly 9 kilometers behind the Ukrainian line, loaded with 4 small guided munitions. Its route is deliberately indirect, not a straight line to the target, but a wide loop east, then south, threading between 2 known Russian listening posts before turning back west toward Tokmak. The flight takes 66 minutes. At cruising altitude, the R18 is nearly silent from the ground. Its thermal signature is minimal. Its radar cross-section is smaller than a bird. For an hour and 6 minutes, it is simply not there as far as anyone on the ground is concerned. 12 minutes from the target, ground fog started rolling in off the Molokna River Valley, thick enough that Sych briefly lost visual reference to the tree line he'd mapped 5 nights running. He dropped altitude to 60 meters to get back under it, a move that put the drone dangerously close to small arms range if anyone below happened to look up. Nobody did. 02:58 a.m. The R18 arrives over the suspected position and begins a slow, wide loiter at 90 meters. Sych switches to thermal. For the first 6 minutes, nothing. Just cold trees and a cold road. Then, at 03:04, the generator trailer lights up on his screen. A bright white rectangle against the gray-green background, running exactly on the schedule Ukrainian intelligence had logged 5 times before. Where there's a generator, there's a load. Sych pans left. What's most surprising about this moment isn't that the radar was there. Ukrainian intelligence was already fairly confident of that. It's that the crew had left the antenna array only partially struck down, folded, but not disassembled, as if they expected to bring it back online within hours rather than days. Under magnification, the shape under the netting resolves into something unmistakable. Ribs of a phased array panel, the characteristic angled mount of a Nebo-M L-band module. Confirmation. Sych radios it in. The response comes back in under 90 seconds. Cleared to engage. He brings the R18 down to 70 meters and lines up his first pass. Not on the antenna itself, which is the hardest target to guarantee a hit on, but on the generator trailer 6 meters to its east. Cut the power, and even an intact radar goes dark. 03:11 a.m. First drop. The munition falls for just under 3 seconds. The generator trailer erupts in a white flash that blooms across the thermal feed and briefly blinds the camera. When the image clears, the trailer is gone. In its place, a spreading fire lighting the underside of the tree canopy orange. 1 target down. But a radar without power for 90 seconds isn't a destroyed radar. It's a radar that gets its generator swapped out by morning and is broadcasting again by nightfall. Sych knew that. So did everyone watching the feed back at the command post. The next 3 drops weren't insurance. They were the actual mission, and the fire from the generator had just told every Russian soldier within 2 kilometers exactly where to start shooting upward. He brings the drone around for a second pass, this time lower, at 55 meters, tracking directly over the netted array itself. The fire from the generator is already casting enough light that his thermal feed is starting to wash out. He switches briefly to daylight camera to hold his aim point. 03:15 a.m. Second drop. This one lands almost dead center on the folded antenna mount. The netting vanishes in the blast. What's left underneath is a twisted lattice of metal that used to have a shape. 2 hits. The radar cabin, the sealed module housing the processing electronics that turn raw, returns into a tracked target, is still standing, 30 meters north of the wreckage. Sych has 2 bombs left, and a drone that's now flown for over 90 minutes on a single charge. Here's the take that'll probably get some pushback. This strike worked specifically because a Russian crew was overconfident, not because Ukrainian technology overwhelmingly outclassed a $100 million system. If that generator schedule had been irregular, if the netting had actually gone all the way down over the cabin, this mission likely fails, and Sych flies home with nothing. Cheap drones haven't made expensive radar obsolete. Careless radar crews have made themselves vulnerable to cheap drones. That's a narrower, less flattering story than the one usually told about this war, and it's the more accurate one. 03:17 a.m. Third drop, aimed at the radar cabin itself. It lands short by roughly 4 meters, close enough to shred the cabin's exterior housing and knock out its cooling system, but not enough to guarantee the electronics inside are finished. There's a detail in Sych's after-action report that stuck with me. He noted the cabin door had blown open in the third blast, and for 2 or 3 seconds, his thermal camera caught a heat signature moving inside it. A crew member, alive, scrambling for the exit. He didn't line up the fourth drop on the doorway. He aimed at the roof-mounted processing unit instead, 6 meters away. Small choice. It's the kind of detail that doesn't make it into most versions of this story. 03:19 a.m. Fourth and final drop. It lands almost exactly on the processing module. The cabin's roof caves inward. Whatever was still functional inside the Nebo-M complex a minute earlier is not functional now. Sych holds the R18 in a slow orbit for 4 more minutes, filming the aftermath. 3 separate fires, 1 collapsed cabin, no return fire, no pursuit. Then he turns the drone north and flies it home. Would you have made the same call he did, aiming for the equipment instead of the doorway, with a crew member visibly still moving inside? It's the kind of split-second decision this whole war increasingly comes down to, made by a 26-year-old with a joystick and 11 minutes of fuel left. The R18 lands back at its launch position at 04:31 a.m. Total flight time, 2 hours and 39 minutes. Total cost of the mission, including all 4 munitions, under $15,000. Total assessed damage, 1 Nebo-M radar complex, functionally destroyed. By dawn, Russian military bloggers had picked up chatter about an explosion near Tokmak. The first public post, from a Telegram channel with roughly 500,000 subscribers, described it as a generator fire at a technical facility. No mention of a radar, no mention of a drone, just a fire, apparently accidental, apparently minor. Back at the Ukrainian command post, an intelligence analyst working the overnight shift spent the following morning cross-referencing the raw thermal footage frame by frame against 3 weeks of intercepted emissions logs, building a timeline that nobody upstairs would sign off on until it held up against every earlier false alarm the unit had chased that month. On paper, that cover story should have held for weeks. Ukrainian forces rarely confirm strikes on air defense infrastructure immediately, specifically to avoid revealing whether they know the extent of the damage. In practice, it collapsed within 48 hours, not because Ukraine said anything, but because the S-400 batteries that depended on that Nebo-M feed started behaving differently. Confirming a mission kill on a radar this well shielded is its own problem. You can watch it burn on thermal and still not know if the core electronics survived. Ukrainian intelligence solved it the same way they'd found the radar in the first place, by watching what it stopped doing. For 61 hours after the strike, that sector of the Zaporizhzhia front logged no new S-400 target tracking activity at all. A radar that's merely damaged comes back faster than that. A radar that's gone doesn't come back at all until something replaces it. Something did replace it. Satellite imagery reviewed by open-source analysts showed a convoy, flatbed trailers consistent with radar transport, moving south from a depot near Zhizhanskoye in occupied Crimea, beginning on February 20th. Russia wasn't going to leave that gap open for long. The question was, how long the gap would last before the replacement was operational, and what Ukraine could do with that window while it lasted. Not as long as Russia needed, as it turned out. Deploying and calibrating a Nebo-M complex from scratch takes days, not hours. Antenna alignment alone typically runs 36 to 48 hours under field conditions, longer if the crew is rushing. For roughly 4 days, that stretch of the Zaporizhzhia front had a hole in its early warning coverage where the Nebo-M feed used to be. Ukrainian strike aircraft operating south of Orikhiv flew missions in that window that would have been considerably riskier a week earlier. Precision strikes against Russian logistics near the M18 highway, conducted with guided glide bombs launched from inside what had briefly become a blind corridor. None of that makes headlines the way the radar strike itself does. It's the unglamorous payoff. Not one dramatic explosion, but 4 days of a defensive network flying half-blind, and a handful of missions that got through it clean. Put yourself in that Nebo-M crew's position for a second. 3 weeks of quiet, disciplined operational security. Rotating firing windows, short broadcast bursts, careful scheduling. And in the end, none of it mattered, because the one thing they couldn't hide was a diesel generator running on a predictable 11-minute cycle, 6 nights in a row. The replacement radar was fully operational by February 24th, 6 days after the strike. Ukrainian signals units picked up its first emissions that evening. New position, 12 kilometers further east than the one Sych had destroyed. Whether that unit is still there today isn't public information. What is on record is that between February 18th and February 24th, 2026, one $12,000 drone bought 4 days of reduced radar coverage over a stretch of front line that both sides have spent 2 years fighting over, meter by meter. There's a piece of this story we couldn't independently verify for this video. Details about exactly what Ukrainian aircraft did with that 4-day window, beyond the strikes that have been geolocated. If you've seen sourcing on that, drop it in the comments. We read all of them. Sych flew 11 more sorties in the 3 weeks that followed. None of them, according to people familiar with the unit, matched the significance of February 18th. Most nights, drone hunting still looks like what it looked like before this strike. Quiet passes over empty tree lines, 6 blanks for every hit. A generator that might mean nothing at all until, on the right night, it means everything. That's the actual shape of this war in 2026. Not a single dramatic weapon that changed everything. A 26-year-old former refrigeration technician, a $12,000 octocopter, and 3 weeks of watching a diesel generator turn on and off until the pattern finally told him where to look. If you want more reconstructions like this one, pulled from declassified footage, built around the operators who actually flew these missions, subscribe, and let us know in the description which strike you want us to break down next.